All right, welcome back for another episode of Beginner's Guide to Hololive official card game. I'm going to explain some effects and weird card text in this episode, since having perused the Discord for a little while since the launch last Friday, I have seen many of the same questions. So I'm here to make a video so that people will stop asking these questions, hopefully, if they find this video. This is already the first set, of course. So when it comes to further releases of this card game, I'll probably make some more videos on that. Having played this card game for the time it's available in Japan, I pretty much know what these all do. And I'm honestly looking at the English version kind of for almost the first time or so. And I will give my thoughts on how they're handling that as well in this episode. So yeah. Now, again, little disclaimer: I'm not an English major or anything. It is my native language, but I would say I didn't really go to school for an English degree, if that makes any sense. I'm just a humble card game player, which, if you are in those kinds of circles, you kind of understand that reading cards can be difficult. Let's get into the effects in this card game. So, first of all, well, effects. They're pretty neat. The key word in this card game is abilities. For simplicity's sake, I'm mostly just going to be calling them effects because they rarely use the word abilities in the first place in their card text. It is just the word they will use, however. So you do have to be a little cognizant of that. Even though they have some categories that literally say effect, they are still categorized as abilities. So yeah, be careful of that going forward. And well, at least it's not Yu-Gi-Oh! So most cards don't have huge paragraphs of text describing what they can do once per turn or once per game or, hard once or soft once or whatever. There's nothing like that. So you don't have to worry about that. And there's five main types of abilities. And I'm going to cover four of them because the last one is kind of like whatever. They are going to be arts, collab effect, bloom effect, and gift. As well as support cards are technically an ability. More on that, like maybe towards the end. I'm not going to cover them in this video though, since they're mostly straightforward, and I don't really think I need to go over them. So let's get into the cards, each type of effect in the game, and of course, in this game, it's very simple. So you do just kind of read the card and explain the card, except when it doesn't work. So I'm here to explain the weird ones. But here we go. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about arts. This is the attack of the game. This is when you enter your attacking stage, or like when I'm going to use an attack. And you're just going to follow this very simple procedure. This is a little bit of mechanics as well. But number one, you select a target for your arts. So you're either going to target your opponent's center holomem or their collab holomem, or in some cases, you'll select something else. Is literally only one case after that, I think. Two, you're going to resolve the ability of your arts. So this is going to happen based on the text in the card, obviously. I have two cards listed here. It's Takanashi Kara and Ozuki. And I'll talk about their effects in a sec. And then you perform damage calculation, and then you do life reduction as needed. So this is how the order is supposed to go. So if you're always wondering, like, well, gee, I wonder if I do damage first, if I do my card effect first. Well, you're supposed to do your card effect first, which I'm pretty sure is the same for Pokemon. So if you played Pokemon before, this is usually how the flow works when you attack, is that you attack the, you know, target. So in this case, usually it's the front. There are a lot of Pokemon that can target the bench, but you're targeting the front, and then you perform the effects of the attack, and then the attack resolves. So that is how this game works also. So now I'm going to talk about each of these two cards. First, we have Takanashi Kiara, a very lovely card. She's pretty meta in Japan right now. Her bottom attack is a move called Majestic Phoenix, and it says it gets plus 10 for each holomem in your archive, and then return 6 holomem from your archive to deck and shuffle it. This is called a mandatory effect. You can't opt out of the effect of this card, so it always applies when you use the move. And yeah, you just follow through. In this game, effects are follow through based. They are not Yu-Gi-Oh, where you have to be able to do the effect in order to use the effect. This is a Pokemon type of deal where you just do as much of the effect as you can. Like, so if you only have 5 in your graveyard, for example, you're just going to shuffle all 5 of them back, and you'll get plus 50, no problem. And Asuki also has a mandatory effect attack on her first one, which just says if Toki no Sora is on your stage, send the top card of your cheer deck to your holomem. This is also not optional. It does have a condition, but you probably wouldn't turn down the effect even if it was optional, so it doesn't really matter. It's more of like a, you know, it's more of like a, I can't even think of the English right now, but it's more of like a thing that you would still do even if you could choose not to do it. Like formality, I think is what the word I'm looking for is. Oski also has a second attack called, if I can read it anyway, Destiny Song, which is a move that has a you may roll a dice, or you may roll a die once. If it's odd, this arts gets plus 50, and then if it's a 1, it gets plus 50 more. This is a optional effect. You can choose not to do it if you really want to. I don't really know why you wouldn't in this case, because it seems like it's all upside and no downside. There's no downside for hitting even, but some of these do have like a condition you probably wouldn't want to make happen. I just picked Oski because she has both the mandatory and optional effect, but yeah, pretty basic stuff. There's nothing too complicated to go about here. Or so you would think. There are some weird ones, so let's get into the weird ones. Here's the first weird one I'm going to cover. Hoshimachi Suisei, the second stage one. She has an attack called Shining Comet, not Shooting Star, that's the SPOG skill, which is a move that costs 4 cheer and that does 60 damage at base. It's super effective on red, so you get plus 50 just for hitting a red unit. And it has the following cost. You can archive 2 blue cheer attached to this holomem, and then the following effects happen. One is that you get plus 60 to this damage for each holomem stacked under her. Now, if you've played a card game that deals with the stack, this is not exactly the same stack you may be thinking of, but it's more actually about how many different holomem are under this holomem. So how many times did this Suisei bloom to get to where she is now? Normally it's going to be 2, right? You got debut and first. So at very least, you're getting 120 damage for using this effect. And if you happen to get more, which is kind of rare in Suisei builds because she doesn't have any way to really accelerate the blooming efficiency on that one, but she can do extra damage from that. So maybe plus 180, or if you're really crazy, you can do plus 240. It's a little overkill at that point because even at plus 120, it's usually getting a KO, or it's usually downing one of your opponent's holomem. It's 180 damage after all, and you can add like axe or boosters or whatever, and yeah, it can get really powerful stuff. Also, an added effect if you do the cost is that you can actually target your opponent's back holomem with this move. So you can kind of ignore the conventional I select a target, I then use the effect, I then follow the damage calculation, where you can just choose to pay the cost of this effect, and then you can target your opponent's back holomem instead of their front. But do note that this effect doesn't work with the SP Oshi skill on the Hoshimachi Suisei Oshi card, which requires you to hit the center or Collab holomem on your opponent's side of the field in order to duplicate the damage to a back holomem. So for the most part, you're never using the second part of this effect in the early game because you're trying to destroy your opponent's board by hitting their front and their back. But maybe in the late game or mid game, you'd want to actually target their back holomem. Maybe they're trying to build a character that you really just can't afford to let them get set up, so you want to hit a back holomem with this. This is one of the major reasons why Suisei is still very good in the current format for Japan. But I mean, it does have its weaknesses. Like, you need to work pretty hard to get over 200 damage. So really fat decks can usually have a good matchup into Suisei. That's weird one, number one. If you choose not to pay the cost, it's just a 60 damage attack that costs 4 energy, which is really, really bad. So usually you're always using this effect, but in case you're not, then I guess that's fine. Moving on, we have this next weird art, Toki no Sora from the booster pack. The second Toki no Sora from the booster pack is also kind of a weird one because she has a very unique effect that's currently unique to her even in the Japan's format, where you can roll a die if you want. It's free, so you might as well. And if you roll a odd number, you then get to repeat the arts on the same target that you selected in the selection stage. So you would select a target, you then perform the effect, you then do the damage, but then you would recycle and redo the whole thing from beginning again. You can't reselect your target though, that's already locked in. This works really well with Ozki's Oshi skill, which allows you to choose the dice result once. It does cost 3 holo power, so this is probably not the best thing you could be doing with your Ozki Oshi's skill, but maybe you don't have a Zeta online, or maybe you don't have any other dice roll effects you really want to rig, so this would be a perfect time to do it. And, you know, it works well with damage boosters like Stone Axe, or even like a debut Sora's Collab effect, or later on there's going to be a couple other ways to boost your damage as well. It just does a lot of damage. Usually you only need to hit twice because 80 times 2 is 160. But if you have damage boosters, then those damage boosters get boosted too. So it's like it really stacks and gets out of control. It definitely one-shots any red character because it's super effective on red, just like the Suisei before. So really excellent attack. It also costs a little less than the Suisei move, but it is a little strict on 2 white, 1 colorless. So you don't necessarily have the flexibility of using this with other decks necessarily. But, I mean, if you can get the 2 white cheer, then maybe it'll work in a double color deck. But, yeah. This is a pretty strong card. It's not, like, overwhelmingly powerful or anything, but it is a strong attack, I would say. Maybe a little luck reliant. But you'll find that 50-50 is pretty strong in this game. So, yeah, no worries there. Okay, I'm going to move on from arts now. So I've talked about so far how there's some mandatory effects, there's some optional effects, and that some weird arts are already in the game. Most of the other arts are pretty self-explanatory, so you just read the card and it tells you what to do. Next, we're going to talk about collab effects. This is the, I think, the strongest version of effect or ability like in the game currently. This is an effect you gain when you collab a holomem, and then you follow this procedure. First, you're going to collab. This requires you to place the top card of your deck into your holo power. This is the collab cost. This happens before your member even moves into the position, technically. But a lot of members, a lot of people I play with, will just move the card to the collab and then deck out the top card. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, since when you say I'm going to collab this card, you are supposed to put the card into holo power. So that always happens first, and then you just resolve the ability of the collab effect. Now, some of these are really, really strong and game-breakingly good. Like Amane Kanata here, who just says that during this turn, your center holomem gets plus 10 arts, and if they were a Gen 4 holomem, they get plus 20 more arts. That's plus 30 damage. That's quite a bit of damage. Okay? It is one of the reasons why she's currently restricted in Japan's format, because you can technically chain this every single turn as long as you have, an Amane Kanata on your bench that's not resting. So that's free plus 30 damage every turn. It's kind of ridiculous. So that's why they limited this card. And on the other hand, there are some collab effects that are like completely unviable and unusable, like Mori Calliope here. A spot holomem, which I've talked about, is not a very good holomem archetype. But her effect is you can return 1 to 3 cheers from your archive into your deck, your cheer deck, and then you shuffle the cheer deck. It doesn't really get you anywhere. In fact, some decks prefer those cheer to be in the archive, so this might be actively bad in those decks. Yeah. I would say most spots have a pretty terrible collab effect attached to them. That's kind of their whole gimmick right now. Some of them do have useful ones. I would say Pecora's spot is very useful in Polka builds right now, since you don't really have that many other options to accelerate the buzz out. And I think also the Knoll one is also pretty good as a mini ramp kind of deal. So those are ones to keep a lookout for, but most of the spots are kind of terrible. Now you might be thinking, all right, there's got to be some weird strong ones in this mix, right? And you'd be right. One of the weird effects are Oro Cronies, which is the second stage Oro Crony. Her collab effect is called Rewind, and it's a mandatory effect. So when you collab, you then have to do this. Of course, you could select a character that doesn't have any stages on it, then you would technically whiff it. But yeah, you're supposed to pick a target with this. Now, it does read something like return one of your opponent's back holomem to debut holomem, and then it specifies that you need to remove damage, 1 debut holomem, and all of the cheers remain, and return all other cards to hand. Now, if you're a native English speaker like me, this sentence reads like crap. And what it actually means is that you're supposed to heal the target you pick first, and then you just return all the cards that aren't cheer or debut to the hand. This is kind of like a super devolution, except you're healing your opponent, so you can't actually use this to take any life, like you could in like Pokemon with TM devolution, for example. This is a pretty gimmicky effect. It is maybe situationally useful in Promise decks. I probably wouldn't recommend using it, because trying to get your Oro Crony online when you're already trying to get your Mumes and your Irises online is a bit of a hassle. And I will admit it's quite funny to pull off the effect, and maybe it can win you a game, especially if they have like another second ready to go. But if you can reset them back, and it sets them back a little bit more. But I would say the fact that they get all those resources back ultimately means that if you're not in a game-winning position by your next turn, you're probably still losing. Um, so I would say this is not actually that good of a one, but it is a funny effect. It's a very strange one. It's kind of like a nerfed devolution, and I guess they over nerfed it because it's currently pretty hard to use and get to. So that's one of the weird ones. Now here's one that isn't actually that weird, but I just need to specify a ruling on it. This is debut OCG from the structure deck. This is a very actually splashable card in a lot of decks because she's pretty generic. But you collab, and then you have an optional die roll, where if you get a 4 or less, you can ramp the top card of your cheer deck to one of your holomem, which is very good. Pretty much any deck wants this. You do have to get a 4 or less, but that's like a 2/3 chance. It's pretty good, so you'll take that. And also it says if you have the result as 1, you can move this holomem to the back position. So you can move it backstage. Now, a lot of people ask, well, that makes the collab position open again, right? So that means I can collab again. But actually, collabing is specified as a once per turn action. So even if you collab this OSCI and you hit the 1, you can't collab again after doing it. People ask that all the time. But I'm here to say you can't do that. And don't worry, I asked that question a long time ago too. I was like, maybe you can use this to collab again. And then I quickly found out you can't do that. It's in the rulebook. So just rest assured, if this happens in a game and your opponent tries to collab again, that's illegal. So you can judge call them for it. Additionally, this card doesn't go to rest when they move back from the collab position. Resting only happens in the reset stage of the game. So you wouldn't be resting this OSCI when she returns back to your back position, which means you can just collab her again next turn if you really want to. Now, the main reason you would want to move her back to the back position is because she's very squishy and it prevents your opponent from picking up an easy life. This is very good because a lot of the other Collab like OSCI, who are very low HP and good collab effects, don't have the option of moving back, so they're just kind of a liability for you in the mid game, late games especially. So yeah, ruling kind of question there, but you can't collab again. End of story. Let's move on to bloom effects. So here's our next type of ability. Bloom effects. This is pretty understandable if you're a Pokemon player. Basically, it's just a once during your turn when you play this card to evolve one of your Pokemon type effects. Okay. Now, it doesn't have to be from your hand, though. This just means blooming in general. So when you bloom into a Pokemon or a Hollow with this kind of ability, sorry, I said Pokemon there, follow this procedure. You just resolve the ability. There is not really any downside, and there's usually not that many costs. There are some costs, but they're pretty easy to fulfill, and there's no like pre-cost to do it. There's no order of things to do it. Now, bloom effects tend to be a little less powerful than collab effects, typically, but there are also some really good ones. A lot of bloom effects actually search the deck or excavate the deck, so they're pretty good as interim support to drag out pieces from your deck, thin your deck a little bit. But also notably, they are not once per turn. So, well, at least unless they say they are. Some of them will say that. But bloom effects, not once per turn. So just like in Pokemon, if you have a bunch of Polka lined up, and then you have a bunch of first Polka in your hand, each one you evolve can do the bloom effect, which is very good, because Polka just says you can get a fan from your deck and put it in your hand, which is very good if you're playing the Polka strategy of souping up your Buzz Polka with many, many fans. This is a very, very solid strategy to be using. It's also a very good effect in general to be able to search your deck for something like for free, essentially, as long as you have the debut to play it on. Iris here is also very strong. In fact, she's a little too strong. Remember that these aren't once per turn. So if you have multiple Iris, you can receive the effect multiple times. And Iris's effect is a little too strong. When you bloom this Holomem, this turn, your center and collab promise Holomem get arts plus 30. So it's a flat plus 30 damage. And it also stacks. So if you bloom 2 Iris, you get plus 60 for the turn. That's a little much, don't you think? That's why this card is also limited in the current format. Now, in your guys' format, it's not limited. And just like the previous Kanata I also talked about, that's also not limited in your guys' format. So you can expect Promise and Kanata to be kind of the top decks in terms of performance, mostly because these cards aren't hit yet. Alright, and you might be wondering, are there any weird bloom effects? Well, not really. Most of the bloom effects are actually very understandable. However, something weird happened that they didn't carry over to the English side for some reason. There is one weird one I'm going to talk about. It is this Takanashi Kiara, who has a bloom effect called Let's Do This. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, reveal a holomem from among them, and add it to your hand. Then archive the remaining cards. Now, you might be reading this and you might be saying, well, this seems like a mandatory effect. And you'd be right. This is a mandatory effect. But the adding is not mandatory. And you might be saying, but it literally says reveal one and add it to your hand. How is that not mandatory? And the answer is, it's because cover said so. In a Q&A for the Japanese side, which I'm not sure if the English side exists yet, they literally had a question where it was like, if I see a holomem in my 3 cards that I see, can I just archive all 3 cards? And the answer is yes. Now, you might be wondering, that still doesn't really make sense. Like, why would you be able to do that? But if you've played Pokemon, this is very important. This is known as fail to search, where you search some kind of hidden information. Like, your opponent doesn't actually know what's in the information, right? And then you can just say, I don't get anything from that search, right? And that is the same thing that's happening here. So when Kiara procs, she basically says, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. Your opponent doesn't get to see those cards, so they actually don't have any idea if there's anything in there. And so if you choose to archive all the cards, okay, that happens after you choose to reveal a card. So if you choose not to reveal a card, your opponent still doesn't know what's in your 3 cards. And then they go to the archive. And at that point, your opponent will then know if you had any cards there. Now, you might be wondering, why would you do that? And the answer is, Kiara's core strategy is to have as many members in the archive as possible. So this is actually good for her strategy. And in later deck builds, you usually choose to fail this search if you don't need any of the cards she picks out. Presumably, this also works with any card that excavates or searches. So, for example, the previous Polka, it also seems like it's mandatory. The search is mandatory. The add is not. So you just got to get that into your head, where if something asks you to look at something and not show your opponent before revealing something, you can just choose to fail the search. And then it just resolves without you adding anything. That just is something you're going to have to know. It's pretty natural for Pokemon players, but I know if you're coming from like Yu-Gi-Oh, which requires you to have like a search target, that can be a little hard to wrap your brain around. So yeah, just know that that's how it works in this game. All right, and finally we have gifts, which are a bit of a weird standout in the current set for you guys, because there's only 3 total cards that have a gift. But it's kind of a conditional passive ability. All you have to do is fulfill the condition for the gift, and then the effect of the gift becomes active. And it's like a long-term effect that always happens. So I have 2 examples here. Kazuma Iroha, the first version of it, and Debut Ozki, a different version of Debut Ozki, I should mention. Let's take a look at Iroha real quick. She has the gift Bodyguard, which says Collab position only in brackets, which means she needs to be in the Collab position for this to actually be active. Your opponent's holomem arts can only target your Collab holomem. However, it excludes special damage, is what the text reads. And basically what it means is she has a permanent follow me-like effect if you play Pokemon VGC. That's the other game I play. But basically she redirects all damage to her until she gets downed, and then, you can do whatever. This excludes special damage. So for example, if you have like, I think Sweet Say has a lot of special damage, but those are like effects, I guess. There are a couple cards that do special damage for effect as arts. Those would not be redirected by this ability. Just the main damage of the arts gets redirected by Kazuma Iroha. So like the target selection is Kazuma Iroha, but the special damage can still be targeted anywhere. Pretty useful effect. It's very strong. There's been a lot of builds with this over the months here with Suisei and with like Coyote and some other cards. I don't know. It's pretty strong, but I think ultimately it's a little slow because Iroha herself has to be in the collab, which means you're kind of slowing down your own offense to put her there unless you are also attacking with her. But even if you are attacking with her, she only does 20, so it's really not that strong of an attacker. But it is a good support piece, I will say. Next we have Ozki here. She has a very unique gift that is currently underplayed, I would say, in Japan's format, but maybe you guys can find more use for it. It basically says that if you have, the ability is called Overwrite, but when you have 3 or less life, you can then ignore the regular rules of blooming and bloom a second Ozki from your hand onto this holomem. And that's pretty good. I would say it works better with the second holomem A second OSCE I didn't show you, which you can look that up if you want to. It's in the card log. Um, it's pretty unique ability. It's kind of like rare candy from Pokemon, but this is the only instance of rare candy really. There's maybe like an ability in set 2 that acts like rare candy, but it requires a lot more investment to use. This is probably the only natural source of rare candy in the game, thankfully, because you probably wouldn't want to have to see seconds on the second turn. Um, but yeah, pretty unique effect. It's currently not really making any waves in Japan, but Japan has already moved on from set 1 like eons ago. So if you're a little strapped for you know deck parts and you have like an OSCE structure and you pulled a couple OSCEs in your pack pulls, then this is probably a strategy to go for. Not a bad one for sure. All right, now let's talk about the big one. The last gift in the game is Vestia Zeta, and I've talked about this card before. She's really strong in terms of like making your deck a little bit more longevity, and also synergizes well with ID. But basically, it's an optional effect that rolls a die. If you hit odd, it nullifies damage. Like I said, it works with the OSCE Oshi really well. But it's also just like a 50-50. Your opponent does no damage for their one thing. Now, note that it does say if your Holomem would take damage from your opponent. You have to choose when to use this. So, for example, I have Kobo here. Kobo Kanairu also listed here. She has an attack called Wave Mantra, which archives 2 cheers from this Holomem in order to deal an amount of special damage equal to the total number of damage on your opponent's back stage. And that is special damage. So when the attack resolves, the effect resolves first, which means the special damage comes out first. You can choose to block that damage with Vestia Zeta. Now, if you do block that damage, you then can't block the incoming arts damage, which Wave Mantra is normally 40. So you wouldn't be able to block the 40, but you could block the special damage. You have to choose between those two. And this usually pertains to like moves that have effect with special damage. This is why special damage is quite strong in the game. But for example, the previous like Suisei we've talked about, that arts adds damage to the current arts. So you can theoretically block all the damage from that attack with Vestia Zeta. And Zeta also says Holomem. So you can protect your back Holomem too with this. So if Suisei targets your back Holomem with the attack, you can also block that. Really strong gift effect there. It's probably one of the main reasons Vestia Zeta is kind of like semi-relevant, although I'm not sure if she's that relevant anymore, thanks to set 4 coming out. But I would say, up until set 3, she was a pretty strong option in a lot of decks, since she slows down the game a lot, and she gives you a lot of options for defensive gameplay, which is not something you normally have in this game. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for all the different effects on Holomems. And support cards, I mean, there's some weird ones, but they're mostly straightforward, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. Just read the card, and it's all right. So finally, some closing thoughts. Ultimately, this card game is not that complicated in terms of what kinds of effects there are. There's a lot of small little details that can be missed, however, and for those little things, we have a Q&A in the Japan side, but I'm really not sure if the English side has been updated, if at all. So just a lot of people coming into the Discord and saying, hey, I don't know how this works. Can someone explain this? Hopefully I covered all the little niche cases regarding effects, but when it comes to like other things, I might have to get another video for that. Now, you might be thinking about, well, okay, that's cool and all, but some of that English was not very readable, and I would say I agree, but it turns out that cover seems to prioritize one-to-one translations over readability, which, is to their benefit and their detriment. It means that the card is in their most pure state, is as close as possible to the Japanese version you're going to get. But at the same time, some of that doesn't translate very well. So, oh well, I guess. Like, that's just the way it's going to be. And honestly, I think Bushiroad has this kind of habit with all of their properties also. So it's just kind of like cover matching the distributor's wishes, I think, with that one. For the most part, they're pretty easy, though. And of course, as any card game happens to happen, they'll introduce some more complicated mechanics and card effects that will get released a little later. There are definitely some weird ones, in set 4 and set 3. So keep an eye out for those as they come up. But ultimately, card effects in this game, not rocket science. Just read the card. You'll be okay. Niche cases, look up videos like this, or, consult your favorite, Discord about that one. So thanks for watching, and if you had a good time, then please hit the subscribe button, and I'll put some more content out like this. And I'll see you in the next one.